It's a fun fact that I learned very recently that I'm sure you already know, and I'm just behind the game on this. The Clash did not write I Fought the Law. I thought they did. You know the song, I fought the law and the law won. Great song. A little weird I'm saying it's a great song in church. It's not a real churchy song. You know the song, and hopefully you know what I did not know, that the Clash didn't write this. Clash are a 70s, 80s British punk band. They're great. The song was originally written by a band called The Crickets, which was Buddy Holly's band. However, Buddy Holly, R.I.P., had died before the Crickets wrote this song. The song became popular and famous before the Clash ever started singing it, when Bobby Fuller 4 began singing it in 1966. All three versions are really good. All three are kind of punk rock, even the one written in 1959. The Clash version, you really get the sense, though, that they knew what it was like to break the law and lose. So I encourage you to listen to those. And what does that have to do with my sermon? Nothing. I just wanted to share with you a fun fact I learned. But it made me think of the law. And what we have here in our Exodus reading is the giving of the law, the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments. The people of Israel are fresh out of Egypt. They've just made it out. They are brought to the foot of Mount Sinai. Moses goes up the mountain, and while he is up there, he is given these commandments from God. He then comes back down, gives them to the people. The people are like, Moses, tell God to stop talking. Just you. No more God. It's too much. You talk for us, Moses. So Moses goes back up and receives more of the law. The thing with the law, it's not a very fun topic. It's not something, here's a 10-point sermon on each of the commandments of God. You would all be sort of bored. But you probably would be interested which ones you've broken, and you probably would be even more interested in which ones your neighbor has broken. But they are given by God out of love. These commandments are given not to be a killjoy, but out of love. They are a boundary of, this is like the minimum requirement for a community to have justice. This is sort of bare minimum. The love that God has for his people, he wants them to have a community that loves each other, that has these basic boundaries. They're fairly universal. A lot of these commandments can be found in all sorts of other religious traditions and ethical systems, but what makes them unique is the one who is giving them, God, who calls the people, who frees the people. He gives them these commandments. He wants them to be a people of justice. And he wants ultimately his people to love him and to love each other. And you can't love each other if there's not justice. It turns out I can say I love you all the time, but if I'm oppressing you, it just doesn't come home the same way. It would be a bummer to be a dictator, I think. You couldn't really love anyone. So God gives these commandments to create a community of justice where there could be love. And we see in them God, his call on us to both have service to him, to obey him. The first 4 commandments are directed towards God. And then our duty and our service to each other. The other 6 are neighbor directed. Following these commandments, it's not going to make you neighbor of the year. It's not going to make you a super, super holy person if you just scrape by with these commandments. It's sort of like people who have the yard of the month in your neighborhood. You know the types. They have you may be one of the types. Yard of the month, and that's great. These commandments are not going to give you the yard of the month. These commandments are going to keep you in good standing with the HOA, though. Like, you're just keeping the possums out and the grass barely cut, If just not murdering people, not coveting, not lying, not stealing, again, this doesn't make you like a super holy person, but it does mean that you're doing the minimum requirement of love, which is justice towards God and towards your neighbor. I will say, though, if when you get to commandment number 10 on coveting, it gets trickier. These commands that God gives to his people out of love for them are a description of what a community formed by justice should look like. They showed the people of Israel and us today the shape of obedience, but they cannot make you obedient. These commandments, don't steal, don't murder, are fairly basic. But we also find, especially when we get to number 10, do not covet, that we have a spotty track record in keeping them. The commands can give us a boundary, but they cannot make us obedient. It's a great Gillian Welch song where she sings, "I want to do right, but not right now." And the commandments, they tell you what is right, but they cannot make you want to do it and live it out. So what does God do? If we fast forward, God sends his son Jesus. This is our gospel reading. God has given the commands. The people have heard them, have tried to follow them. It was not enough, so God sends his son. My daughter the other day was talking with my mom. I don't know why they were talking about this. I'm glad they were, but about why Jesus came. Why did God send his son? And my 5-year-old daughter said, God sent his son because God retired. And so he needed to send someone. It's like, no, that's not quite right. I'm a little nervous. You didn't learn this in Sunday school, did you? So don't ask my daughter for her Christology. It's still not good. God sent his son to do what the law was unable to do. The law could give a boundary, could reveal an ideal, but it cannot make you fall in love. And so God himself enters our world. The Son of God, born of the Virgin Mary, becomes part of the human experience and history. Our parable today shows the extent to which this Son is willing to serve the people to whom he is sent. We have this master of a house who plants a vineyard. Vineyard in the parables, it's used multiple times, is picking up on a usage that's in the Old Testament for the people of Israel. The Son is sent to the people of Israel. This master of the house, he first sends servants. These are the prophets. And the tenants, the people who are tasked with taking care of the vineyard, they do not listen to the servants. They do not listen to the prophets. So what do? They abuse them, they kill them, they stone them. And so the master thinks, if I send my own son, finally they will listen. The son is sent to the vineyard. He is killed by the tenants. Jesus tells this parable during his final week before death. This is right after he's entered Jerusalem. This is right after the events of Palm Sunday. And Jesus becomes clear about what is going to happen to him in multiple parables and teachings during this week, that he is about to die. The master of this house, the owner of the vineyard, he could have sent a general, an army to enforce his rule on these wicked tenants who are not listening. He could have sent an auditor to check, to go over the books, to look over the accounts, to make sure that every dot is crossed, or every T is crossed. I'm mixing my metaphors there. However, the master of this house sends his son. Jesus, the King of Kings. Jesus is the last and greatest prophet. Jesus is the great high priest. Jesus has all power and authority and dominion over all things. But this son shows up to his vineyard to check on the tenants in his vineyard in humility. The son that enters his master's property is born in incredible humility, born a poor man. Jesus is raised in what we would call a hick village. Nazareth is not the place to be. Jesus enters the world with no political power or powerful connections. And Jesus, the Son of God, he doesn't even demand worship from others. Jesus could have gone around demanding obeisance from everyone. Bow before me. But Jesus, the Son, goes to the vineyard in humility. He also doesn't show up checking, reviewing the list, making sure that everyone's kept all those 10 commandments while he's been away. Jesus cares deeply about justice. In fact, if you read the Gospels, people often say the God of the Old Testament was the easy or the hard one, and the New Testament God is a lot easier. I think if you read the Gospel of Matthew in particular, read the Beatitudes, Jesus raises the ante so much further than the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments says, don't murder. I've never murdered anyone. Check. I'm great. Jesus is like, well, maybe don't hate your brother in your heart. The 10 Commandments say, don't commit adultery. Check. Jesus is like, don't even look with lust on another person. Jesus cares deeply about holiness and justice. He raises the stakes, and yet he does not go around as an inquisitor, making sure everyone has been a good boy and girl. He does not go around looking for rule breakers, law breakers. He does not come to earth to be an enforcer of the law. In fact, Jesus seems to spend a lot of his time with people who stink at keeping the commandments. Most of his time is spent with people who probably did not even know all of the 10 Commandments. He spends his time with tax collectors. They at least break the commandment of coveting. Stealing, they made their money literally by stealing from people. Lying, and supporting murderers, the Roman Empire. So, okay, technically they didn't murder anyone, but they were supporting murderers. They were not keeping the commandments of God. He also hangs out with prostitutes. This is what the gospel says. I will let you figure out which commandments they were breaking. Jesus keeps the law perfectly, but he shows mercy and compassion again and again for lawbreakers. He does not show up as the enforcer of the 10 Commandments. Have you kept these commandments? Do you know the commandments? He shows up in compassion and mercy for people who are failing at keeping the commandments. He doles out grace quicker than a bank handing out a subprime mortgage in 2006. You don't need to prove you can pay it back to get it. And you are given it, knowing it, you will likely default. This is the grace that Jesus gives. You don't have to prove that you can earn it. And once you are given the grace, Jesus is fully aware that you are maybe not going to live into it fully, and yet it is given to you freely. God sends his Son not to enforce the law, but to do something beyond what the law could do, to turn his people's hearts to him. God wanted to change our hearts to make us fall in love with him. This is in many ways a continuation of the story of Israel. If you notice in the 10 Commandments, it begins with God reminding the people of Israel, remember, he says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Before these commandments are even given, before the law is given, the people of Israel are saved by the grace of God. The people of Israel didn't have to earn God's salvation to be freed from Egypt. God gives that to them first, and then he gives them the commands. But in sending a son to the vineyard, God does something unexpected and new. God draws nearer than could have been imagined in the Sinai story. When Moses goes up onto the mountain, the people can't even touch it. They're so afraid. The voice of the Lord is so terrifying. God's raw holiness is so overwhelming that the people tell Moses not to let God speak. Tell God to stop talking. It is too much for us. You talk for him. They say, Moses, you talk, but not God. The law creates boundaries, but it does not create intimacy. So God sends his Son, obedient to the law, to a vineyard where the tenants have not taken good care of it, knowing that the tenants will turn against him. God so wants to be with us that he is not going to wait for you to get it together first, to start finally obeying the law before he draws close. In conclusion, you'll have noticed at the end of this parable, there's a note of judgment. The stone that breaks and crushes. This cornerstone that if it falls on you, it will crush you. And if you fall on it, it will dash you. If you think that faith in God is a morality game, that God cares more deeply about other people's sins than your own, that mercy is conditional, if you think that grace depends a lot on your own deserving, that you have earned it, that because you have kept the bare minimum requirement, the 10 Commandments, you are a good little boy and you should be given divine treats. If you think that this vineyard, the church, your faith, the grace of God is yours to control and to wield over others, then this stone will crush you. But this stone becomes the support, the foundation, the base of a life lived in intimacy with God. If you trust, if you stop worrying about other people's virtues and vices, if you let go of your delusions, if you stop thinking that you need to deserve to be loved before you can be loved by God, if you accept the grace of Jesus, then you can cling to this stone, this cornerstone that is Christ, and find life. In fact, life eternal. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.